Well, how do you do? We are in a very interesting world, which means it's a very frightening world. And what is being done at this point, on both sides of the Atlantic in particular, is not, at first glance, particularly refreshing or assuring. The situation is as follows. We have a president who is unfit to, even for citizenship, actually, who is clinically insane, and the specifics of that are that there is no question, in fact, but that he is clinically insane. However, the problem is that because of certain things that have happened over the recent several decades, we in the United States no longer have, generally, the kind of courage that a citizen would tend to have in earlier times. The assassination of Kennedy, of John F. Kennedy, and the launching of the long, prolonged Indochina War, in which we lost our morality, our courage, and everything else, has taken its toll. And what's happened since then, particularly in the past nearly 10 years now, under George W. Bush Jr. and Obama, has done everything to destroy the confidence and even the morality of our people. Now, the problem is intrinsically an old kind of problem. We in the United States were particularly fortunate in the sense that there was a renaissance which occurred, well, actually probably implicitly with the birth of Nicholas Cusa in 2001. And this man turned out to be the greatest genius, probably the greatest genius in all history since his approach toward maturity. He changed science, he changed everything more than any other single individual in this process. And out of this we had developments, scientific and other developments, which were unprecedented in the sense that everything before Cusa's birth, everything before the beginning of the 15th century, was far inferior to, in every respect, what happened with the Council of Florence and the things associated with that. And despite all the evils that have been done in the course of modern history, modern European history in particular, despite the long religious warfare from 1492 through 1648, despite the horror show which the British Empire created in the 7 Years' War and has continued to create ever since then, despite the horror which has hung over from the Roman Empire, from Byzantium, from the Crusades, and from the horror show of the War of 1492 to 1648, that period. We had accomplished something, especially in the beginning, 1620, with the landing of the pilgrims there, and then the Massachusetts Bay Colony development. During this period, from 1492 until the crushing of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, we had launched the greatest initiative for civilization since actually the work of the Great Renaissance. And out of this came, despite the crushing of us by the British interests, or what became the British Empire, we succeeded over a period from 1620 until 1782 in establishing a republic which is unique in all human history, but which found itself at the end of that century with the French Revolution and similar effects. We found ourselves repeatedly crushed because here we were a great movement, a great nation really coming into being on the Atlantic side of the world, while all hell was bursting loose under the British Empire. Ever since, there have been periods when our influence, and we've had friends and allies in other parts of the world, in which we've had a momentary surge, as typified best by the case of Franklin Roosevelt, President Franklin Roosevelt. It was an absolute revolution. We were a political, moral junk shop from the assassination of McKinley until the election of Franklin Roosevelt. Under Franklin Roosevelt, we achieved for a moment a great affirmation of our traditions. With the death of Roosevelt and the advent of Truman, we began to go down again, and down, down, down. For a moment, John F. Kennedy resumed the influence and the trends of Franklin Roosevelt. And then he was assassinated. He was assassinated by people who tied to Wall Street and tied to London. That's who killed him. And it was deliberate. And the killing of his brother, Robert Kennedy, that assassination was also deliberate. And from the assassination of those two Kennedys, this nation has never fully recovered to the present day. Bill Clinton did an excellent job in what he tried to do, but the circumstances under which he lived as president were not the best. Now we've come to the point, as of this past week, beginning this past Monday, in which Europe, Western Europe, began to degenerate into a collapse. And the United States is on the verge of plunging into the same transatlantic collapse. In fact, the entire transatlantic world, from the Americas into Europe, is now in a general breakdown crisis, is finished in its present form. And in its present form, there will never be, in our lifetimes or beyond, there will never be a recovery unless we bring it into effect now. And my estimate is that we shall never escape from this unless we very soon expel the current President of the United States from his office. If we cannot find the people who have the guts, when the evidence is that this president is clinically insane, I said that in 2009, and everything I said then is true today. I made no error. This guy should have been thrown out of office then, when I first presented the case for his insanity. Now you see him now. He's destroying everything. He's killing Americans en masse with his economic and related policies. He's conducted illegal wars. He becomes an agent of a foreign power working against the interests of the United States. The financial situation. What happened under the beginning, essentially, under George W. Bush Jr., who was, I don't know where he was when he was there, but at that point we launched a policy in opposition to my Homeowners and Bank Protection Act proposal of 2007 that would have stopped this crisis. But no, some people thought they were smarter than I was. And what they did is they led us into that, from that time on, down the lane toward what happened in 2008, the beginning of the disintegration of the U.S. economy. And the U.S. economy has been disintegrating ever since, with no hope of recovery under the policies of either George W. Bush Jr. or those of Obama. Obama has done more to betray and destroy the United States than any other traitor in our history. But we have to forgive him because he is clinically insane. But then can we forgive those who, faced with the evidence of an insane president who's committing murderous acts of warfare which are in violation of the Constitution, can we forgive the people who are in power, who have the power, who don't have the guts to throw this guy out of office under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, for which he is culpable, fully culpable, for the violations of the Constitution, the frequent ones, for which he's culpable? We sit there like impotent cowards, seeing our people and our nation destroyed under the influence of this British-owned puppet? And the only people who fight are a few of us. I, for one, and some generals, some senior general officers and similar people, who've warned us that what Obama is doing is a threat to the existence of the United States. It has an effect which is tantamount to that of treason against the United States and its people. He's increasing the death rate among our people willfully. He's destroying the institutions upon which recovery depend. He's acting to destroy the food supply, such that come in the spring of next year, we're going to have a threat right now of mass destruction through starvation and similar kinds of conditions, on a large scale among our people. And only a few of us, some generals, me, and some others, have shown the wisdom and guts to recognize that the policies of this president must be brought to a cessation. Otherwise, this nation, and probably civilization more generally, will not survive. We're now in a situation where we're threatened by drawing the United States into a general thermonuclear war. Not just a nuclear war, but a thermonuclear war. With this past week, the President of the United States, so-called, attacked his Secretary of State and forced her, under intimidation, to say things contrary to her belief, but using the full muscle of the presidency to threaten to crush her. And she did things under that pressure of being virtually crushed by this beast, this madman called the president, which caused a strain between our most important U.S. ally at this time. Russia, under the leadership of Medvedev and Putin, are seriously the most effective, together with China, the most effective partner of the United States against this threat. Cooperation between Russia and the United States, with the agreement with China and some other features, would stop this war, would stop this danger. So this president, who is not fit to be dog catcher, the dogs would probably agree, has now created this kind of situation where he is in fact a British agent. In fact, he is only a British agent. He probably was not elected. That is, he was probably not elected, nominated for the Democratic nomination as president. A very screwy kind of little thing happened there. And it was all paid for with British drug money. And I do mean British drug money. The Queen of England does push drugs. And we've got a little trial hearing on that question going on in the United States involving the Attorney General of the United States. Were they covering for a drug-pushing operation, which is what it was, or not? So here's we stand. We stand in a desperate situation. The preconditions for a general thermonuclear war have existed. What has happened is, since the mass murder, which was perpetrated by the President of the United States in defiance of the Constitution, mass murder in Libya, is criminal murder. This is not killing, this was criminal murder, politically motivated murder of a head of state in a war which was conducted in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Now this has led to an attempt by the British, the French government, and the government of the United States, presently, to push a war into the Middle East, targeting specifically Syria and Iran. However, if you look at the military configuration in the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, and in the Gulf of Persia, you see that the troops there are not in there for a little operation, like a new Iraq war. What's intended is a confrontation with Russia, the principal nuclear power on this planet. That is, Russia, the former Soviet Union, what's left of that in Russia, has the greatest potential in terms of strictly nuclear power on this planet. The only other nation which is relevant for major warfare, continuing warfare, using nuclear or thermonuclear power, is the United States. The significant deployment of U.S. forces in the Mediterranean region and in the Gulf is the U.S. thermonuclear war capability. We have repeatable, in-depth strength to conduct thermonuclear war, which Britain does not have and other nations do not have. They may have thermonuclear capabilities, but they don't have a sustainable knockout blow capability in terms of thermonuclear war. The only relevant opponents of the United States, Britain, and France in perpetuating this crime, this war crime, is China. Is the only nation which has any comparable capability. So what you're looking at here is, if the U.S. forces strike, and they know that a strike means a thermonuclear confrontation, which means that the United States has to be committed to a preemptive thermonuclear strike, means that we are faced with general thermonuclear war. And who can survive from that is very much in doubt. But the President of the United States, together with the people who control him in London, around the British Queen, are determined to push us to that policy. We have a man who I have contempt for. He's an old enemy. Gorbachev, I call him. He was my opponent when I was proposing at one point, proposing the Strategic Defense Initiative, something which I concocted and had a lot of support for from various countries, including from the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, at that time. We are now at the point where our capabilities are put a thrust against the combination of the British forces, taking us to the edge of not a local war, not of this, not of that. We're headed for, with this confrontation with Russia, which the President of the United States pushed very hard in his attacks on his own Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. This man and his British backers are madmen, worse than Hitler. And they're taking us to the brink of thermonuclear war. And most people in this audience don't even know what thermonuclear war is. But it's something way beyond anything in their imagination. And the only people, apart from me and a few others, who are effectively opposing this publicly are some general officers and people of similar credentials in the U.S. military. They have been the only thing significantly standing in the way of our already being plunging into a thermonuclear war from which the human race might not survive. And that's our situation. And the problem is our politicians, our leading elected politicians, have no guts when it comes to the challenge of acting to save the United States from this kind of horror show, from bending to an Obama who they could throw out of office in the morning and who should be thrown out in the morning. And it should be yesterday morning if possible. And that's what we're faced with. So we can talk about courage and so forth, but courage is not just the idea of going out and having the guts to punch up with somebody or something like that. Now, courage is the ability to do what you must do when doing it is extremely dangerous. That's courage. And we don't have much courage of that type among our members of Congress. Oh, we have a few suspects I know of who I would intend to trust, both on the Republican side as probably as some on the Democratic side. I know the former President of the United States, Clinton, has good intentions on these kinds of matters. I know that his wife, who was practically brutalized by the President of the United States, also has instinctively excellent intentions and character on this issue. But she has been bullied. You want to talk about, racism and similar kinds of things, feminism and so forth? That's it. You have a brute, a madman, a man unfit to hold office, a basketball player, who threatens her and tries to intimidate her against her own intention, to try to make her a vehicle in creating an incident between Russia and the United States, with the threat that something terrible will happen to her if she does not submit. We have a press that doesn't tell that story, and it's a truthful story, well known. And it's a story which involves the threat of our being involved in a global thermonuclear war. That's where we stand. And I don't find the politicians in general, or even the majority of our citizens, who have a sense of the guts to do anything about this. They sit there and complain and say, we have to get along to go along. They say, well, let's wait for the next election. Buddy, you're going to be blown away by the next election if you don't do something now. This man must be thrown out of office now. He is clinically insane. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment prescribes precisely the remedies to be taken. He also has committed violations of the Constitution which are sufficient for his expulsion from office. Why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? That's where we stand. Now, there's another aspect of this situation which is also equally important. How do we know anything? How do we can say we know something? On the one hand, what we have as a way to know what's going on in the world is sense perception. Now, I can tell you that sense perception is not very reliable. It's something from our animal side. These are not precision scientific instruments. But mankind, by using a set of several instruments of these types, these so-called sense perceptual instruments, is able to use contradictions and contrasts among different kinds of sense perception to try to come up with a formula of how to deal with things. For example, the discovery of gravitation, which was done uniquely by a great man, Kepler. Kepler was the only person who ever discovered gravitation. Nobody else ever did. The only people who did were those who repeated his discovery or worked upon perfecting it and extending it. So Kepler discovered gravitation. How did he do that? Well, first of all, he took two principles. One was the principle of sight, using the telescope. The other was harmonics. And these two kinds of sense perception, human sense perception, juxtaposed against each other, were used as a way of testing experimentally a single conclusion which we call the principle of universal gravitation, which Einstein, for example, referred to in defining the nature of physical space-time, is how the way it's organized. So all of our great scientific discoveries were based on use of imperfect instruments, those with which we are usually born. Sense perception, sight, smell, so forth. These are the means by which we attempt to find out what's happening outside our skin. We don't actually have a direct knowledge of what's going on outside our skin, but we have, by this kind of method, we have a way of approximating and estimating what is going on outside it. Now, in more recent times, we've come with a better source of information. It started this time with a guy called Eratosthenes, who was the first person to discover the size of the Earth. He conducted a very famous experiment, actually several of them, and which decided that. And this sort of process in development of astronomy, and using also the general astronomy of the star system and so forth, was the first source of information with the aid of sight, in finding a way of knowing what the real universe is, as opposed to merely ordinary sense perception, which is dogs and so forth have. So this gave us the ability to build up what we call today the general electronic or similar kinds of things, astronomy, and these kinds of things that we're doing now. So we have we have two sources of information, which in contrast give us our knowledge of how the universe is organized. One is sense perception. Sense perception is intrinsically not reliable. It's reliable for certain purposes, but it doesn't tell us what the principles of the universe are and how they're organized. We have then also electronics, what we call electronics, which includes telescopy and so forth. These other means. And by contrasting these two sets of means, what we might call on the one hand electronics and the other sense perception, the two of them, the contrast of the two of them, give us two media. One, the least reliable, which is sense perception. The other is electronics. Well, electronics is much more precise than sense perception in terms of physics. And therefore, as we have advanced in physical science and been able to extend our human knowledge into the larger parts of the universe, as Riemann outlined this in his habilitation dissertation, we are able to now today to do things and able to understand things that mankind has never been able to understand before. This advantage, this gain, has given us the power, which for the good, and the power to destroy the planet at the same time, and the stupidity with which to aid in destroying the planet at the same time. That's where we stand. And therefore, the great decisions that have to be made are not made in the form of the field of battle, though the field of battle is very much there. The decisions to be made are not that who can win the war, because winning the war now, when you're talking about thermonuclear capabilities and the kind of warfare that makes those capabilities used on both sides, whatever the two sides are, you can no longer talk about warfare in the old style fashion. Mankind has now reached a capability and also a degree of stupidity and insanity that we have the ability to destroy this planet, or the ability to destroy most of the people living on this planet, to destroy civilization. So the issue is not war. The issue is what is the alternative to war. Because under the present trends, as long as the British Empire maintains the power it maintains today, and as long most Americans are stooges, are stooges in fact, for the British Empire, war is not the question. It's getting rid of those and the power of those who would cause us to make war. There are problems to be solved on this planet. They can be solved by other means. War is not necessary to solve these problems. There are other means by which we can control this planet if we wish to. But there's some people who wish to destroy the planet in a sense. And the typical of those is the British Empire. Now, there's a dark part of the history of mankind which is very relevant to this situation. Mankind, again, has been essentially an educated beast with certain capabilities. And for most of what we know as civilization, particularly European civilization as such, has involved various kinds of warfare under a system of governance, which is called essentially an empire, an imperial system, an oligarchical system. What has happened is that in a certain point of our history, which is sort of an area which is lost in the dust of uncertainties, but the effect that we know, the exact process we don't know in detail, but we know much about it. At a certain point, their maritime power developed on the surface of this planet. It was not just an ordinary maritime power, it was actually transatlantic and similar in nature. So the great cultures which gave us the knowledge of astronomy were generally the great navigators of transoceanic travel. And therefore, from this group, which is much more intelligent because much more informed by information, by dealing with astronomy, that's how we got our whole astronomical system, was from the great navigators who were transoceanic navigators, and learning how to navigate by the stars and similar kinds of considerations, let's say 200,000, 400,000 years ago. There emerged a maritime culture which had superior power through this knowledge of astronomy and so forth, greater power than the ordinary people. And from among these people, these mariner types, they became colonizers. Most of the human population was not on the land area, it was on the shore area or in the lakes and waterways. And so these were largely farmers or like farmers and hunters. They were very weak in terms of their strategic capabilities relative to the great navigators who acted almost like pirates. So this kind of quasi-piracy became a dominant feature in much of the world's oceans and on the coasts of the world's oceans. And the ordinary people, who were farmers or the like, found themselves the victims of the strategic advantage of the maritime culture. From this came what is known as the oligarchical system, which is what the Peloponnesian War, for example, was an illustration of. So you had naval power descending upon people on the land or coastal areas and enslaving them and said, you are animals, we are gods. And the term gods was a term which was applied in various languages to the navigation, the marining system, which was able to imprison and to enslave virtually. And these people would treat human beings otherwise as animals. They would slaughter the excess animal or control them in other means. And so we had this fight like the Peloponnesian War, this fight where the oligarchy said, we are the gods, you are the cattle. When you become too numerous, we kill you. When you become threatening, we kill you. When you become too intelligent, we kill you. We destroy you. And that has been the basis for the dominant culture of this planet. In the process of modern history and earlier, there was a struggle against the oligarchical system. And from that there emerged the effort at modern society, of which the founding of our United States as a separate part, separate from Europe, was an essential part. The strength of our United States is we are superior to Europe in one respect, that because Europeans have never freed themselves of the full continental European grip of the oligarchical system, like the monarchies. They've never freed themselves of this oligarchical tradition and this monarchical expression. The British Empire is still the British Empire. Every part of Africa is controlled by the British Empire. And anybody who doesn't admit that is a liar or stupid. Huh? The British Empire controls all of Africa. The British Empire owns Saudi Arabia. It controls the Arab Middle East. It controls other parts of the world. It's a real empire, like the old empires. And we in the United States are crucial because it is our position from our founding of what we are in the United States, which gave the world the opportunity to get rid of the oligarchical system. But you have all these Wall Street types who are nothing but British ass-kissers, agents of the oligarchical system, who will, even as citizens of the United States, will ally with the British Empire to destroy the United States, or destroy what the United States means. And the suckers go along with it inside the United States. The people who've lost their cowardice and judgment, who've lost their courage and judgment, continue to allow this to happen. We've come to the point that we're now at the urge of thermonuclear war. We've been there since the close of the Libyan adventure. We are now still there. Recently, with the assault by the President of the United States against his Secretary of the State, we came a very large step closer to thermonuclear war. What the President did, President Obama did, in his attack, his savage attack, and 2 successive attacks to brutalize the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, brought the world closer to thermonuclear war. And nobody in the United States has done anything about it. Nobody has moved to get this bum out of office, which is essential if we want to stop thermonuclear war, prevent it. No one has defended her significantly, publicly. None of her colleagues has defended her against the abuse that was done to her. He should be thrown out of office for that itself. Any president who does that to one of his officers on that basis and for that reason, first of all, how did this happen? Well, you have a former Soviet official, Gorbachev, an old enemy of mine, and a British agent, who I was up against together with President Reagan on this issue of the SDI. The SDI was my baby. is called in. President Reagan adopted it, promoted it. The Soviet incumbent, who was also a British agent at that time, not really an honest Russian patriot, backed up the British against the SDI. And senators and others of the United States went along with the British on orders emanating from Andropov, the head of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev, who went through a similar exercise, is also a traitor to the Soviet Union and to Russia today, and also a British agent. And this British agent, Gorbachev, was the guy who was involved in the intimidation of the Secretary of State of the United States in this manner. And the President of the United States was an accomplice in that operation. Using an agent of the British interest in setting up the threat of a thermonuclear attack on Russia, and thus a thermonuclear war between Russia and the United States, etc., etc. And we sit back there and say, well, it's not our time to act. It's not our time to do anything. It's not our time to meet these challenges. So what we face in our own people out there, especially those in higher influences in office, who do not act to throw this bum out while we still have a nation, while we still have no thermonuclear war, they are actually like traitors. They don't mean to be traitors, but only cowards. And sometimes there's a little difference between the two of them. That's where we are now. We are now starving to death. Our economy is being destroyed by this president under orders from London. As of next spring, if nothing else happens, many of our Americans are going to die of hunger because the food supply has been destroyed under the policies of this incumbent president. There will be no adequate food supplies come this spring. And last time to solve that problem is the time to throw this president out of office now, specifically under the 25th Amendment, Section 4. And also under the fact that he also is violated the Constitution repeatedly and is vulnerable for expulsion. In the meantime, you've got a bunch of Republicans as candidates who, visible now, are no relief to this threat. We don't have any great geniuses who you can trust out there in the Republican roster of candidates. We have some people who may be gentlemen, some not, but some others may be, act like gentlemen. We have a Democrat, this president who wants to be re-elected or something. He's no damn good. But if we could somehow just throw this person bum out, throwing Obama out, what would that do? It would mean that you would have all kinds of prospects for a Democrat to put up. And I wouldn't go for a Democratic-only ticket. I would go for a bipartisan ticket. Because what we need is a coordination and collaboration among the best people of our political system in major national office. That's what we need. I certainly would not want to have a Democratic platform of candidates, of federal candidates, which did not include certain Republican members. Because you can't trust the Democratic Party as a whole. But you could trust the testable qualities of leadership, of proven leadership, of certain Democratic and certain Republican candidates. And since we need unity in this case, we should not get ourselves tied up in a struggle between the Democratic and Republican tickets at this time. And that should be our policy right now. No showdown between Republicans and Democrats per se. What we need is an assembly of proven merit in terms of potential candidates of both tickets, particularly the leader, the best ones, and bring them together for a common cause. Let them be members of different parties, but let them be first citizens of the nation and representatives of the citizenship of the nations. We want the best minds of both parties, in particular. We want to get rid of the rubbish of both parties. Dump it by the right side at the same time. So we must be acting now, at this moment, before Christmas, to get this bum out of office and to understand that we need to get a selection of candidates who represent the best selection of federal candidates on both tickets together. So we are going to make decisions on world affairs on the basis of the interests of the nation and the world. We are going to act, if you won't otherwise, we're going to act to bring ourselves together in collaboration, not only with people in Europe and other places, but also in the East, in Asia, in the great nations of Asia in particular. Because we have a job to do in building not only the world, our world, we have to get into space now. The nature of mankind is, it may not look like that, but for sometimes many of us have recognized, going back to the time of the World War II and afterward, particularly the 1950s, we began to recognize that mankind could not continue to confine our habitation to Earth itself. That in our Earth-bound population must extend itself to become a space-bound population as well. There are things we have to deal with which constitute potential threats to mankind from things floating in nearby space, just like that big hunk of rock that passed between the moon and Earth and could have smashed the world to pieces. So we need to get out there in order to protect mankind on Earth from environmental threats. We need to explore the solar system around us for the same purpose. We have to extend our reach into the galaxy of which we are a part. And we have to find ways in which we can adapt man to the ability to live and function in space and in space environment on that basis. So we need at this time a sense of a world and national unity, a collaboration among nations, and close collaboration within the ranks of our own leadership inside the United States. Without that kind of thought, as we go into this crisis today, I don't think we can make it. I just don't think it can happen. We can't wait. We can't wait till some last minute to make these decisions on how the government is going to compose. We know this guy must be thrown out of office. We know the British monarchy is our deadly enemy, as it always has been since the Revolutionary War. We know that we have needs for alliance and collaboration with other nations. For example, let's take one thing that we're dealing with in our organization in particular now. The future of mankind on this planet lies immediately in the withdrawal of ice from the Arctic region and the opening up of the Arctic region for the shift of human activity into the Arctic region rather than the present. Now, the technology for doing that has already begun. It's there. This development is absolutely necessary for mankind's role on Earth. It is also integrally necessary for our extension going back to the moon, going ahead with the Mars project, and other kinds of things, areas which seem totally inhospitable, but which mankind can make hospitable, which we can discover how to deal with. This is the future of mankind. And we have to get out from this past thing, this idea, this lurking idea of going to a thermonuclear war from which the human species might not survive, probably would not survive, or at least not survive in any significant degree. We need to get rid of the policy that leads to that confrontation, which would destroy humanity. We must throw out of office those who would violate that in all parts of the world. We have great projects to perform, great discoveries beyond our present reach to be able to become able to deal with. These issues facing us the next 2 generations and beyond to come, essentially for the remainder of this century. These are the issues of the remainder of this century. We must now proceed to begin to address those issues on behalf of the present of mankind, both in this century, the remainder of it, and beyond. If we think in those terms, and we look at what mankind has accomplished in this way in the past, in this direction, and say we're going to do it again, we're going to make the next leap for the next 3/4 of a century, as we made certain leaps in the last half century, and in the century before that. There is no limitation we can put upon how far we're going to go and must go. So we need a new presidency, a new conception of politics, a refreshed planet, which understands the challenges of today into the remainder of this century. We must begin to mobilize ourselves with long-term investments which lead in that direction. We must, above all, re-educate and inspire our citizens with the mentality which enables them to attack successfully the kinds of challenges which lie beyond escape from the present immediate threat of a general thermonuclear war, which would at the least would determine an extensive extermination of humanity throughout this planet. And it's better to withdraw a bad president from office than to allow a global extermination. Thank you. Charging through.
Mr. LaRouche, how are you?
I'm fairly well, considering my condition.
The question I was going to ask before you came on was removing Obama, and who would you replace him with?
That's easy. Almost anybody. That's first. Seriously, we have plenty of candidates who are qualified, as he is not. He absolutely is not qualified. He's a menace. He's a menace to civilization.
Well, I always thought he was more selected than elected, and
he's not properly elected. But that doesn't mean anything. If we elect the guy who's a bum, he's still a bum, and we throw him out.
Yeah, but those that selected him would not allow him to be put out of office. And if such a situation would arise, I'm quite sure they would have someone to step in to fulfill whatever their agenda might be.
Well, the point is, throw him out. Throw him out. It's very easy to get a replacement. It can be done very easily.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. If people don't know, I just moved here to work on Diane's campaign because she's going to win. She's going to win, and we're all going to be better for it. But the real challenge that keeps coming up in the field, and quite honestly with many people in this room, many of the lovely people in this room, is the question of the idea that mankind, that it's not that things are getting worse at a faster rate, but mankind is entering a situation where the world as we know it is going to be dramatically shifted, dramatically changed. So talking about, Biden versus Obama, or what do you think about Ron Paul or fractal geometry or whatever the hell people want to talk about, I guess I have a question, because you brought up the 2 points being World War III and sense perception not being truthful. And I guess my question for you is, as you've also been talking about metaphor, is how can we really, because it seems like this is what the organizing is really about, is to give people a sense that there's a whole new world that they're going to be in, and we're going to lead it, and you can't see it. And the reason I ask it, sorry it's taking a little time, but the reason I ask it is I was blown away, because you can tell people World War III and they kind of get it because they have this sense. that they're going to be blown up or something, or it's going to be bad. And our generation is so messed up, some people are looking forward to it. But the thing that blew me away is a lot of people in this room and that you talk to in the field, they're more scared that we might not get World War III, that we might get Obama out, we might get Glass-Steagall, and then you have a revolution. And so I was wondering if you have anything to say to that, because that seems to be the big block that you have with people. That's why it seems like they want to talk about these other things. Because that's their question of imagination.
Well,
Yeah,
actually, the problem is they're cowardly. And in many cases, they're induced to be cowardly because they don't see the organizable forces being pulled together which are needed to do what is absolutely necessary. And you find most politicians are wimps when it comes to facing reality. And most citizens, because they see the politicians are wimps, they decide to become wimps too. They may become very angry, but angry to no purpose. They become enraged at what's being done to them and may have strange kinds of reactions to the fact that they are enraged by what's been done to them, but they have no constructive sense of what the action is that they must take. The problem is that we don't have leaders who are leaders. Most of the members of Congress, as far as their behavior is concerned in the Congress, are not behaving as leaders. They've lost that. I know many of them, and they're sitting back there doing nothing for the cause because they don't think it's their time to do that. And the point is, the time is now in which either we do this or we're not going to have a civilization. So the chance for winning, the chance for the survival of civilization, now depends upon a lot of people who think they are not ready to act. And because without that action by them, there's not going to be a solution. And their excuse is, well, it wasn't time for me to act. It was not time for me to act. And therefore, the death of humanity will be expressed by those who say it was no time to act. Now, the alternative is you've got to know what the action is and how the time for action is determined. But if we do not throw this president out of office in the near future, you're not going to have a United States. So there's no discussion to have unless that decision is made. Once you decide to throw him out of office, then you have a game to play. If you don't throw him out of office, kiss the United States goodbye while you can, because you won't have one if he remains in office. And that's a fact. All the arguments to the contrary are absolute nonsense. There is no fact out there which justifies not throwing him out of office now. And you won't have a United States and you won't have a nation unless you do. And that's the question. Who's got the guts to do what is necessary? We simply have to throw this guy out of office. If we do, we can survive. That doesn't mean we're guaranteed we're going to survive, but we have a chance. If you keep this guy in office for any extended period now, you're not going to have a United States to talk about. There's not going to be a presidency to talk about.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. I'm Albert Philippi from New York. I've been following you for decades, since '75, actually, back when I was at Stony Brook. Mm-hmm. A lot of the information has panned out, and I have seen like a lot of the fusion information as well as the space technology information has gone from being public information to classified information. And now they're pushing that into privatized corporate structures that only serve the British Empire and other structures like that, other empires, I mean. My question is, how do we make the transition from this current system of presidency in the United States and make our Constitution basically global and do that successfully when you're going to, right off the bat, when you get rid of Obama, you're going to alienate at least half of this country.
No.
And fighting among them.
No, not at all.
See, the thing is, a lot of the politicians, like Nancy Pelosi, just made an announcement about a few weeks ago. They're allowing these politicians to get rich from insider trading information. So you're basically saying, we're going to cut off your gravy train so we can make a change that's going to help the entire world. There's no guarantee this is going to work. But I know you're going to need money to survive. You're not going to have that. So how do we justify, or how do we change these politicians' minds when they think they're doing this for their own personal survival?
Well, they're not really most of these politicians are not really that kind of person these days. What you have is a depressed political class among the members of Congress. They are giving in, they're going along to get along. They don't have the guts to do anything. And most of the things they do wrong are simply a result of the lack of guts to do right. I know many of these politicians previously. I know, in my nature of my work, I know the international situation intimately, including high levels of governments. I know generally the high levels of our own government in the United States. We have personal contact with them and in various ways. I know them. The majority of the American people want no part of this president. They want him out, period. And they will not accept anything until you tell them you're throwing them out. They have become demoralized because they fear that this president is going to remain president. And they say they're enraged. They're at the point of the enraged that you can expect violence, which comes from when hopeless rage provokes violence. And there's no way that this is not a race question, because Obama is the enemy of Africa. The British Empire is the enemy of Africa. Africa is a colony of the British Empire. It's a homicidal reign of the British Empire over Africa. And there are very few people who are intelligent who believe that Obama is a friend of the black people. It's a nonsense thing. He's a disease, not a person. He's a mental disease. He's an exact copy psychologically of the Emperor Nero. Go look at the Emperor Nero's record. It's all over the place. Look at it. That's your Obama. And that's what he did, and that's what he will do. That's what he's doing. You are not going to have a United States unless you throw this bum out, and quick. We can't wait for the next election. We won't have a nation by that time. He's got to be thrown out now. If he's not thrown out now, forget the United States is dead, and most of the people in it. And we'll probably have a thermonuclear war on top of that. So if you want to prevent those things from happening, if you care about the nation enough to prevent those things from happening, you're going to throw them out. And you will find that you will get the greatest applause you ever imagined from the majority of the American people the minute this guy goes out of office. Because then they will begin to believe that they can do something. Right now we have a population, it's gone through over the period from Obama's presidency acquisition, from 2008, the summer of 2008, when they began to hate him. Because he's a murderer. He's exactly the murderer I described. They began to hate him. And they got to hate him more. Then they became not hateful, but despairing. And that's dangerous. No guts. We've got to give the American people back their guts. Because the politicians don't have the guts, except for a few. It's not that they're bad. They just don't have the guts. And having no guts in a war is rather bad thing to have. And therefore, we have to, who care, must at all risk do what we must to save this civilization. And the fact that we will do that, and that the more of us will do that, will give courage back to our friends and neighbors. And after all, this system is based on the idea of trying to have friends and neighbors, not always quarrels. We're trying to find the common interests of mankind, which we can serve. And we're trying to define the terms of cooperation that are the actual urgent priorities for mankind now, to agree on those priorities and to take on the other issues as well. And we'll find that if we find ourselves cooperating to common issues, we'll come to agreements. Because if we have very much that we prize in our neighbor, in our agreement with our neighbor, we find it easy to agree with them on other things or to find a way of working it out. And the fact that we're now in a situation where people are desperate because they have no confidence that anything good is going to happen. They are essentially enraged. And those who are not enraged actively are despondent. They're terrorized. They're saying nothing is going to work. We have to restore confidence in the people in themselves. And confidence of the people in themselves is giving them back their authority. And those of us who are leaders and who have proven that we can take the heat of doing what I do, are able to lead. And there are a lot of people out there who will be easily able to lead if we make it possible for them to have confidence that they can do it. I've got it all throughout the United States. People who were, angry a few years ago are now despairing. They're sitting there just saying, there's nothing we can do. There's no hope for us. There's nothing that's going to happen that's do us any good. And they're sitting there terrorized by that kind of situation. And they've lost their confidence. Those of us who have the courage to stand up and the capability to stand up and present the alternative have as a chief job to bring the confidence of our people back, the confidence in themselves, the confidence that what they're doing means something. And right now the problem with most people out there, when they see the conditions of their neighbors, for example, they see the neighbors are being destroyed, and they say, we're next. And they're sitting there telling themselves, there's not a damn thing we can do about it. My job is to say the things that have to be said, which will give the people back the courage to say, yes, I will say that too. And once that starts, we've won.
Okay. Okay, next. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Gene DeSanto. I'm from Middletown, New Jersey. And this is more of a comment, but I agree totally. The Congress is just terrible. My congressman had a teleconference call, and I left comments at the end of the call. And this was when the Libya thing began, and I complained about the fact that Obama had not gone to Congress for anything before it all started. And the written response I got, well, I had a nice letter. The first and opening paragraph was, well, gee, isn't it too bad he didn't go and contact Congress about it? And then the rest of the letter was just a bunch of gobbledygook. What can we do about getting these congressmen to act? And the other thing I'd like to say is, I noticed you didn't use a teleprompter.
Thanks.
No, I don't like teleprompters. I don't get along with them. They're busybodies, always interrupt you. Now, we are going to do something, and we are doing something. Now, I'm a fighter, but in certain ways. I'm not out there in the street punching people out or things like that. But when on issues of this type, I've spent my life, and I'm now close to 90, I've spent my life on this kind of issue. And I have a certain sense of how you fight such a fight. And I'm doing it. It's what I do, it's what I know how to do. I'm not going to be running for president. I'm a little bit old for that, as you might have perceived. But I'm certainly going to do everything possible to create the next president as a success story. And I think I've got enough influence in various parts of the world actually to pull that off. All I need is a little more cooperation.
Hi, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Me too, kind of. Only my heart's beating a little faster than yours. My name's Andy. You probably have met me before, but
yeah.
I considered myself an old friend of Jerry, one of your organizers that passed away not too long ago. And it was actually, maybe not too many people know this, but it took 2 to 3 years for him to actually get me to warm up to your organization. And then when he passed away, it felt like I lost the rock that I was actually standing on. Mm-hmm. And one of my questions to you is, sometimes it's easy to present these ideas to people who are around my age, but when I try to present it to people who are older or so-called elitists, they just throw it away altogether. One, how do I confront these people? And two, what are the main differences and the main characteristics or the things that define classical culture that are different from our culture now?
Yeah, well, the problem is classical culture is correct. And what's happened is the destruction of classical culture has been an essential part of the destruction of the mental capabilities of the population. Classical culture has a very specific significance. What happens when it becomes merely entertainment without criteria, then the people lose a mooring. The key issue here is always in humanity is what we call creativity. Now, creativity is not, variation. It is not innovation. Creativity respects certain principles of the mind, which only really classical cultures can convey. What we've had is people have been lost their connection, or never had it, to classical culture. And therefore they go out in life and they find themselves crippled by the lack of classical culture's access. In other words, to think creatively occurs only in classical culture. Now there's authentic classical cultures, and there are authentic classical cultures. We can trace them all the way back to the classical Greek in particular, which is fairly well known. We have other cases of that, classical culture. And they come in different sizes, so to speak, and different flavors. But they all have certain characteristics. And it's a subject in itself as to what classical culture is. It's one of my specialties, but I don't find everybody is familiar with that specialty. But this classical culture has a very specific, unique role in developing the powers of the human mind. And the lack of development of the human mind in that direction is actually an impediment to progress. It doesn't mean you're bad. It means that you have not acquired this weapon, shall we say, the weapon of progress, the present weapon of mental progress. And we have denied most people in society of familiarity with what this concept is. And therefore they're cut off from something they should have the right to know and the right to experience. If someone was given, say in music, and was given a real systemic education in what musical composition is, they would find it not difficult to begin to understand what it's all about. And they would be able to understand what's wrong with the alternative. Because when you discover that you have powers of your own mind, which you discover you were not using, and now you begin to get acquisition to those powers of the mind that you weren't using, you begin to find that you are much more important than you thought you were. And it's that role of classical culture, which is, shall we say, the beginning entry point of classical culture, when people realize that there's something there which they can't get in any other way, and it means something to them, because they understand themselves better than they did before. Then they find a source of strength in that. And the first thing I'm concerned about is the sense of the inner sense of the source of strength inside the person. And classical culture, as any, for example, scientific education and so forth, these things strengthen the person inside because they have access to more power over society and society's condition than they do otherwise. In the sense, when they say, well, I am somebody, I am something, I mean something, I'm not just a thing. I got something inside me that you need to know. I've got something inside me I need to give you. And when you can say that to your audience around you, you feel strong. You feel happy the world is more yours. You don't have to excuse yourself for what you are. You don't have to make apologies for what you are. I learned something yesterday, buddy, and it's good. And that's the kind of thing I would like to convey to people who ask this question, exactly that. We have access, as probably with classical art and so forth, and science, we have the means to enable people to make breakthroughs, even on a fairly limited beginning basis, where they can appreciate what their mind is, what it represents. And once you're sure that your mind means something, then you're empowered, and you're not easily crushed. You don't have to defend, you don't have to apologize for yourself.
And to that end, I was watching this video that you had with, I think it was, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Jussi Björling's grandson, your wife and yourself, the Classical Revolution. And I thought it was interesting, this guy who was your friend, Norbert Breineen.
Yeah.
He mentioned something, and it was really heartfelt with the way he presented it, that he'd been holding something in his heart for a long time, and that the only other person who understood it was you. So could you elaborate on what exactly that was?
Well, he was a real genius. He was absolutely unique. He was of Jewish origin from Austria, and when the Hitler problem became so active, he was among those who fled and went to England. And when he got to England, he finally was put in prison, a kind of prison, because he was of German pedigree, even though Jewish, a Jewish victim of Hitler. And therefore, he and his friends were stuck into a kind of British prison. Then there was a slight improvement in the circumstances, and he and his quartet became one of the greatest musical groups in all modern history. Absolutely remarkable achievement. And he became, through a meeting of a friend of mine on the streets of Paris, when something I'd written on the street, and he was fascinated with that. And by that, we became close friends and remained that until his death. But he was actually a first-rate genius. His work is remarkable. If you understand the string quartet in particular, he's absolutely remarkable. And what he and the team did, the Amadeus Quartet did. So, this is part of the beauty of life. He's dead, unfortunately. He was actually younger than I was. But he was one of those geniuses and a center of radiation of genius in other ways. We had, at that point in our association, until prior to his death, we were associated with, through this group of people in Europe and elsewhere, with all the greatest musicians, or most of the greatest musicians then living in Europe and the United States. And believe me, that was a happy experience. When you find yourself with your next door neighbor, your closest friend in your context, are all people who love what you love and part of the same thing you're part of, then it's a pretty good feeling. And one of the things that's good about artistic and other work and scientific work is a byproduct of that is you get involved, you find something in yourself which you really respect. You are participating in something which is important to you, which defines your life as meaningful. You have all these wonderful musicians, the greatest talent, musical talent that existed in the world in that time. These are all sort of my friends, all in this group, along with Norbert and so forth. What do you want anything better than that in life? And there are things like that in other forms of life, in science and so forth. These are the things that count. And these are the experiences that are precious for you when all your friends are dead. I'm getting to this age of nearly 90, and I've got a lot of all my friends are dead cases. But I have memories of these people, memories of these old friends. And this is one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And thus, I wish everyone would have the same experience.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. LaRouche. He's listening right now.
Good evening.
Thank you. My name is Jessica White. I'm from Brooklyn, and I'm not exactly sure what my question is as a question, so I'm just going to kind of throw some things out there. Okay. Since I've been involved in the LaRouche organization, I've come to know things I never knew before, and I get very, frustrated with trying to go out there and do the type of organizing and talk to people and get them to understand what's going on and get them to do something about it. So I've been thinking all types of things to do beyond what I've already done. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything. I'm just trying to get people in this audience to understand that maybe if they're feeling this way, it's because this is what we have to do. So if we're part of this organization, this is what we have to do. We have to get that frustration to build up, to start annoying people enough and giving out enough materials and going through enough reflection on what to do. So I've even thought of writing an ed-op to the New York Times. I've thought of handing out material on buses, making charts that show what Glass-Steagall is, going through a lot of the things that we as individuals have to come to really fight what's going on and get Obama thrown out. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what are some of the really practical things that we can do to make this happen? Because if I have to write the ed-op, I'm working with colleagues within the the organization now to get something through the UFT on Glass-Steagall. We're met with all types of sophistry every time we introduce this bill, this resolution, and yet we keep plugging at it. So now we think, after months of really hard work, we'll finally get this through the UFT. Then there are other places that, things I've thought of doing, talking to Congress people, going to their offices like we did for Glass-Steagall and the Homeowner and Bank Protection Act. And now it's at the point where I'm getting to feel that I need to hand out stuff on buses, write to the New York Times, write to Congress people. Who are these military people that we need to contact that have been in contact with you? Maybe we need to jump on their case too. So, I think the people in the audience are feeling that, and we need to know some really practical ways of getting this to happen. I guess that's my
Well, as you know,
yeah.
the greatest thing to experience is a surprise.
Surprise.
And, so you walk in to talk to somebody, and what they're going to do, as you know from experience, the first thing you're going to run into in most cases is they're going to pre-discount anything you've got to say. I don't care whether they've seen you for the first time, know who you are, don't know who you are, whatever. The tendency is, on the one hand, is to try to ingratiate themselves with you, one side, or to pretend to doubt you and say, where are you getting that from?
Exactly.
And therefore, the greatest element of art is the element of surprise. And you know what that is. You know what it is in music. You know what it is in science and so forth. If you want to get a class awakened in a schoolroom, you have to surprise them. Because if they can pre-discount you, they're just going to sleep there and watch you. If you surprise them in a way that they cannot deny, then they're going to show some respect, and they're going to respond. And they're going to start asking you things rather than trying to tell you things. And I'm sure that, and this often comes in terms of what you're talking about, is getting in certain strange audience. Say, for in a classroom, you may feel perfectly comfortable. You know the territory, you know how the people are, you've got the case paced even before you get in there. If you go out in the streets with strangers, you're not so sure that you can pull the element of surprise.
Right.
And when you get out in the street more, or in these situations more, then you begin to get more self-confidence and realize that when you're in the classroom, you're self-confident. When you're out of the classroom, you're not as self-confident. But
Right.
you find that's okay if I understand that. Well, that's the game, the way this game is being played. I've got to get in there and not be hesitant, but go in there with a certain caution, but a certain cleverness. And you're going to give them a pleasant surprise that's going to get their attention, and they're going to start thinking. They're not going to react to you, they're going to start thinking about what you're going to say. Once they're thinking about what you are saying, you've got the situation at hand. It's all yours then, and however far it can go.
Thank you.
And you have the whole thing is, how do you define your self-confidence, the proper self-confidence? How do you keep from exaggerating? The classroom, you know how to do it. Right. You know exactly what the rules are implicitly. And on a different environment, you may not be so confident of this is an environment I don't know as well. And you may be more hesitant. Well, the best thing to do is just practice it and get involved with other people more, the intermediate thing, where you can get more discussions with small groups of people and things like that, and get their reactions to you in a friendly response area.
And that's what we should do.
Yeah, so we should be make sure we're forming small groupings, where we work together in a small group, and we discuss what's going on out there, not the classroom area as such necessarily, but some other area, and you broaden your ability, your confidence in dealing with a larger area, thing. And so the more you do that way, the more strength you have in confidence in doing it.
Thank you.
I think the prognosis for you is very good.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn. This is Mark Fairchild from Philadelphia. My question is, speaking of surprises, I was very surprised when the New York Times about a week ago came out with this bombshell expose of the Department of Justice laundering hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars in drug money. And I wanted to ask what significance do you think this has in terms of removing Obama from office? Does this represent a signal on the part of a faction of the establishment that they're getting ready to pull the plug on Obama? And I guess a second correlated question is, how important do you think this Fast and Furious scandal is in terms of creating a kind of Watergate-like environment that would enable us to remove Obama?
Well, Fast and Furious is obviously going to be a factor which is used politically in the present situation. This is not a simple kind of situation, but there are many conflicting kinds of interests involved, particularly when something is not going too well. There's a tendency of someone to start lynching their neighbor. The thing, we've got some competition here. I got to lynch this guy who I was associated with, that sort of thing. So you're in a chaotic situation in which there's nothing positive coming out of this president. Nothing positive. For anybody who's serious, just as a citizen of any kind of interest, there's nothing for them in this president. He represents no good. He is a no good president, and worse. So therefore, you have a tendency for people to jump ship. For example, you will tend to have people going from Republican to Democrat and Democrat to Republican in various ways. Simple things like that. There is very little inherent stability in the affinity tendencies within society today. Very few people trust anybody else. And the trust among people is much lowered than what it had been even at the time that Obama came into office. You think back to what it was like when Obama was first in office. Now, he was a bum, and I knew it. But in the first period of his incumbency, I was in a situation where I was working with people who were then working with Obama. I knew what he was. I knew he had been incarnated as president in some fashion or other. But then I began to see, after a couple of bills that were put through Geithner, I saw what was really going on. And therefore, in the following year, the following spring, I had a complete diagnosis, a fully accurate diagnosis of exactly what this guy was, exactly what he was going to do. He's a carbon copy psychologically of the Emperor Nero. And stuck into office, in powerful office, he was going to act like the Emperor Nero more and more, as the Emperor Nero himself acted more and more like the Emperor Nero, as he began killing people indiscriminately, which is what this guy's doing now. So those are the kinds of problems we face. That we're in a situation which the lack of the sign of a quality of leadership emerging, which could be trusted to do something which is needed badly now, the lack of that confidence is holding the American population at bay. They don't know who they can trust. And the more the Democrats continue to support Obama, and when they see the mess that the Republican assortment is right now, the American people tend to lose confidence in their own future. They don't have somebody that they think is even a decent guy they could trust as a bad president. You know, people often say, well, that president's no damn good, but I got to support him, he's the president. Right? But that doesn't exist anymore. This guy is pure bum, and there's no sign from the Democratic Party that they're going to do anything about it. And my assessment in looking at this situation is, and it's a good assessment, it's a knowledgeable assessment, there are a great number, relatively speaking, of Republicans who I would prefer over a large number of Democrats, and somewhat vice versa. So therefore, I realize that what we need to do this time, and the way we have to think about how we deal with the social situation out there, we have to think on the merit of the citizen, not the partisanship. Yes, partisanship is not indifferent. No, it's not an indifferent question. But we've come to a time when there's been so much betrayal of what people thought they trusted that today you can only bring together an effective force in the Congress by putting the partisan aspect a little bit to the one side. And when it comes to the issue, it should be the issue as such and the implications of that issue which we go with. When we get to that point, if we think we can possibly win, if we think we can possibly get the Obama out of office, I think you will see a revolutionary change in the reaction of the population. I mean, for example, if the word came out today, the Democratic Party is dumping Obama because he's a bum, for the various reasons, of course, which he'd be dumped. Then you would find a revolution in politics because the Democratic Party would, by and large, begin to become the Democratic Party again, at least in the rank and file. And at the same time, you would have Republicans who, having looked at somewhat the Republican candidates are, would say, not that for me this time. And they would say it's much better to be a citizen in holding office in the United States than to be a citizen being held in office by a party. And that's what we have. You've probably heard some of that today. The report that was given today was the fact is we're functioning as citizens first. We're functioning as citizens of the nation first. And when we run in office in a state, a federal office in a state, we are running as citizens of the United States, not members of the state primarily, but associated with the state in a secondary role on the state level. And that's the way it should be. And I think that that kind of formulation, once the shakeup were to occur, in which Obama had been thrown out, I would think you will find a strong bipartisan tendency among the incumbents on the federal level, while they might continue to have a state influence on the state level. And I think that's where we should be headed right now, because I know under those circumstances, like, for example, on the military question, we have a number of people who are tied to the U.S. military at the highest level, similar levels. They are actually more competent on some aspects of the military question, and I trust them on that. I trust their instincts. I know them. So therefore, you would have some people, because of their state-level concerns or other concerns, professional concerns, might be more suited for the Republican Party at this time. Fine. So what? So therefore, we have a mixture of Republicans and Democrats, and maybe an independent or two thrown in here and there, right? But not actually thrown in. But that's all right. And under those circumstances, I think if we can get that now, if we can get that understanding in the month of December, I think we've got it made. Because we're going into the early part of the next year, and then things are going to get sort of closed up in preparations for the coming presidential elections and state elections. This is the time, this immediate time. And I think it's possible. And I think it's necessary for me, for example, to do everything possible to make it happen, which is what I'm trying to do.
Good evening, Mr. LaRouche. My name is Olga Benz, and I'm from Shamrock, New Jersey. I was brought up in a communist country, so I see right away what the occupant of the White House is doing. He's not governing, he's ruling, and he's a communistic dictator. That's what he is. And I was just wondering, he did so much crime and damage in this country. I came here in 1971 after the Russian invasion, which was in 1968. And when he was campaigning, I know right away when he said, I'm not going to govern, I'm going to rule, and hope and change, yes, we can. That's how the Cuban, what's his name? Castro did when he was campaigning. But I think American people, they were sleeping. I mean, they are very naive and sometimes dumb. I'm sorry, because you don't know what communism is. It's misery, tyranny, and slavery. When I came here, I kissed the ground because I was so happy. I am in a free country. And when I see this bomb, what he's doing, it breaks my heart. I'm getting so upset. Yes, he should be thrown out, kicked out from the office. And I don't know why it wasn't done. Why? Can anybody explain it to me? The whole country knows. He said, I'm going to be a unifier. No, he became a divider. and he's a racist, and it's just unbelievable that, I mean, he's sabotaging this country. We can have here jobs. I mean, we can.
I'm sorry.
bring-
Can you ask your question just because the time
Okay,
is
so
short?
if my question is because Mr. LaRouche said that he's, the Empire of England, that he is their outcome. No, he is a communistic dictator. He doesn't have anything to do with the British Empire. That's my question.
No, the British Empire is the problem. That is the problem. It's the only empire on this planet. And if, for example, let's take the case of Africa. The entirety of Africa is a British colony, and it's a mass murderous British colony. You know? And the similar kinds of things. Look, for example, Saudi Arabia is a tool of the British Empire. The 9/11 was organized by the British with the collaboration of the Saudis in terms of that operation. That's the fact. So that you have evil on this planet, as well as some things that are not evil. And the British Empire and what it's done to Africa is an example of evil. You have also, in the nature of the old systems of government, you have many cultures which have elements of oppression characteristic of the government. This characteristic of government comes from the old monarchical system, the oligarchical system, in which in all oligarchical systems there's a tendency of complete repression. Sometimes it's silent repression, sometimes it's violent and loud repression. But people get to know that if you do certain things in a certain way, you get punished, one way or the other. Things happen to you that you wouldn't happen otherwise. So you have, in most of the systems in Asia, we've gone through that. We've had cases like that in the South and in the United States. The slavery system, which was introduced here, is very similar. So we have repression as such in many manifestations throughout the world. We in the United States are relatively free of most of it, of the worst of it. Other countries are more susceptible of it. But the way I approach it is not to worry about that aspect as such, but to look for the cure. The cure lies in what the potential of the individual human mind is, the culture, the development of that human mind. And anything that represses that potential bothers me and should bother anyone. In the United States, we have relatively have had relatively the greatest relative freedom of any part of the world. We've achieved it. But now, in the recent period since Bill Clinton left office, we've had nothing but tyranny, oppressive tyranny. And the British are a tyrannical power. They kill more people, the British kill more people on this planet than anybody else, by all kinds of methods. But the repressive methods in Africa and elsewhere, in other parts of the world, they're there, they're reality. I'm very familiar with them. And I know what happens in Europe and other parts of the world, in this way.
Hi, my name is Dan Gring from the Philadelphia area, Philadelphia group. Mr. LaRouche, I'd like to ask you a question in 3 parts really quick. First part is, if I have your permission, I would like to give my support to Hillary under the duress that she has to deal with every day with Mr. Barack Obama. And I don't know how close you are to Bill, but if it's possible, you can encourage him to make maybe a public statement about what Obama has done to his wife. And then third, I'd like to work with the Philadelphia chapter to try to put something in writing to the local papers about how he's brutalized her when she's doing her part to keep our world at peace. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think the only solution for that thing is throw him out of office. He's not going to be reformed. He may be imprisoned or something, but he's put into a mental asylum, but he's not going to be reformed. The prognosis is he's got an incurable evil inside him, and that's not going to be changed. The point is, when we get that kind of situation, we may elect people to office, we discover they have these characteristics, we should throw them out. We can't say they have rights when they are abusing the rights of others. Are you going to attack the lesser or the greater evil? If a person in power is oppressing people from a position of power, it's they who must be removed, not the people punished for objecting to them. And the problem now is because of what's happened since the killing of John F. Kennedy. The United States has no longer had the morality it had at the moment that John F. Kennedy was killed, and particularly when his brother was also killed. And this was during the period of the Indochina War, which would never have happened if Kennedy had not been killed. He was supported fully by General Douglas MacArthur in his opposition to the very idea of the Indochina War. And he was killed because he opposed the war, which the British demanded that was be done to him. That's the truth. His brother was killed for the same reason. Bobby was already about to be nominated as the Democratic candidate for president at the moment he was murdered. The murder of the two Kennedys spelled out the cause for all the suffering which have occurred as a trend since that time. This is not to say that Jack and Bob were great spirits of genius or something. They were both very intelligent people. But the issue here was they were legitimately one the president, one would have been the president if he had lived to become president. The killing of these two changed the character of the United States to one of degeneracy with Nixon, and we never really did one back. Reagan was Reagan. It was a break in some of the worst elements there, and had played some good roles. Bill Clinton was exceptionally good. He had certain shortfalls in terms of what his ability to perform was, but he was a good choice otherwise. And for 2 terms, that's really remarkable in those circumstances. When Bill was out of office, no, the hell came in. And you look and say, what's the history of this? Well, George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush were offspring of the Bush who in New York put Hitler into power in Germany. He moved the money, together with the British, into Germany when Hitler was about to be thrown out of politics for legal reasons, and Hitler was put suddenly in a position of power again for the purpose of creating the coup which brought Hitler to power. And this was done by Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush, and the father of W. Bush. These people were both tied in any way to the Wall Street crowd which had fully backed Adolf Hitler. And as soon as we'd won the war against Hitler in the invasion of Northern Europe, the British went back to supporting the same policies under which the British had used to put Hitler into power in Germany. And that's the nature of things. And it's when we understand the true history of how the people of the United States became demoralized with a sense of betrayal and misleadership and lack of trust of anything was linked, what happened when, after Bobby was killed, and this process started. We have never been the same as a nation. We have never been courageous as a nation since these things happened, since the assassination of Kennedy, and we all knew it was an assassination, not by some oddball, but a deliberate killing to eliminate a president of the United States because he was an obstacle to British policy. And his brother, when then about to become a candidate for the presidency, Democratic president, was killed too, and then hell broke loose. And it's been getting worse most of the time since. And the case of Bill Clinton was sort of a miracle that came there somewhere, like in the middle of the sandwich, somewhere along the line. That's where we are. We now have to get our nation back And we have to have the guts and the wisdom to do the things that will bring that back now.